Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Lori Wolf. I'm the president and CEO of the 4-Acre Group. Our thanks to Senator Murkowski, Senator Sullivan, and Congressman Young for making the time today to talk directly to Alaska's nonprofits. Unfortunately, we just got word that Senator Sullivan has been called to the White House and can't join us today, but we'll be sure to be sending him all of the questions, and we know his staff are also on the call. Julie Fate Sullivan will join us to offer some opening remarks. We know she's a champion of the nonprofit sector here in Alaska, and we're pleased to have her with us. Thanks also to the 4-Acre board members and our funding partners from across Alaska who are joining us for this event. Thanks to our friends at the Small Business Development Center for providing this platform today. We are forging a strong relationship to help all of you navigate these new relief options. In Alaska, we know how to help our neighbors and our communities. In fact, Alaska ranks 4th in the nation for volunteerism. Nonprofits are also an economic force. We employ 44,000 people across the state and account for 17% of Alaska's workforce. We are grateful for the relief measures recently passed by Congress, and specifically cover charitable and veterans organizations, our C3 and C12 organizations. This is the first in our nation's history. Make no mistake, this is no small moment for our sector to be recognized as essential. We thank our delegation for their role in making this happen. 4-Acre is doing all we can to ensure that nonprofits can weather this crisis, and you are doing critical work serving Alaskans. Our health and human service nonprofits are on the front lines of this crisis, adapting each day to meet increasing demands, fewer volunteers, and dwindling funds. Our arts, culture, childcare, religious institutions, and animal welfare organizations have closed their doors in the name of public health, but they still have to maintain their facilities and carry out their missions with a complete loss of income. Every nonprofit is impacted today, and most of us will be impacted for the long term. We have nonprofit board, staff, and volunteers from across the sector and across the state on this call, and we are grateful for each of you for joining us. To begin our program, each member of our delegation will provide opening comments, and then we'll turn to questions. We'll try to get to all of your questions you submitted when you registered for this webinar, and if we still have time, we'll move to the additional questions from the chat and question bar. Please know that we encourage you to ask your questions, even if we don't have time to answer them in the next hour, because they will help us know what areas we need to address moving forward. The delegation staff has requested that we send all of your questions to them so they can see what is concerning Alaska's nonprofits. So now let's turn to our guests. Senator Murkowski will begin our discussion.
Thank you, Lori. I appreciate this opportunity to be speaking to so many of you and to be on the line with our delegation. I think you will hear that we have been joined at the hip throughout this as we have worked to address the many concerns, the issues that Alaskans have across the state. We're trying to get accurate information out there on a host of different levels as we're all dealing with the coronavirus. I want to begin my comments with just a quick recap. We're going to be talking primarily about the CARES Act, which was passed, signed into law just exactly a week ago today. So it hasn't been, the ink hasn't hardly even been dry on this, and we're really moving. But prior to the CARES Act, we have been working to address not only the health impacts, but what we know to be the serious economic impact of the virus. On the 5th of March was when we really started the legislative effort. At that point in time, we moved out a supplemental funding to the states and local governments with HHS grants coming, a real push to make sure that we were we were gearing up within the CDC to go after this virus, working to develop a vaccine, working to develop the appropriate treatments and testing. Phase 2 is what we referred to the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. This focused on paid leave, support for states who were gearing up for what we've seen with the surge in unemployment applications, significant funding to USDA for to provide for waivers for food so that we can make sure that the most vulnerable were not in need. Testing to states, testing to individuals at no cost. So then we move forward with the CARES Act, significant in that it passed the United States Senate unanimously, and then was adopted by the House upon voice vote. So this is not a partisan solution. This is all hands working together. To speak specifically to the provisions that are perhaps most relevant to those in the nonprofit sector, and Lori, I want to acknowledge what you have said about the vitality of the nonprofit organizations around the state. In so many ways, you define the best of Alaska, and so we thank you all for your efforts individually and collectively. But we also know how dramatically and immediately the nonprofit sector has been hit, and I think we're still trying to take in the extent of what this economic setback is going to mean for all of you. So specific to some of the provisions in CARES, the payroll protection program that has been discussed at great length to provide loans to small businesses specifically defines eligibility to include our 501c3 nonprofits, 501c19, our veterans organizations, tribal business concerns. Again, these are for businesses that are less than 500, but it is important to recognize that as a small business loan through an SBA 7A lender, you would be able to effectively have forgiven 8 weeks of the loan amount based on allowable expenses, and those allowable expenses are payroll, 8 weeks of payroll expenses, and then any additional amount that goes towards your debt obligation, mortgage, rent, utilities. And we are recognizing that these definitions that we're dealing with don't always recognize very well the seasonality of much of what happens in Alaska. We're still working through that, but that is an important part of the program. I'll be able to go more into specific details with these programs in the questions and answers, but I want to also reference the economic injury disaster loans that are also available for other nonprofits, because again, the payroll protection is for those nonprofits that are 501c3, 501c19, but others such as 501c4s and 501c6s are able to take advantage of emergency economic injury disaster loan grants in the legislation. So that's something that I think is important for these other nonprofits to recognize, that there is an opportunity for participation as well. Other relevant provisions, the employee retention payroll tax credit. This is a refundable payroll tax credit of up to $5,000 for each employee on the payroll. You have to have carried on business during the calendar year 2020 and had business operations fully or partially suspended, or have a reduction in revenue of at least 50%. But it is important to recognize that while this is an opportunity for you, there are limitations in that a 501c3 and a C19 that are also receiving the payroll protection program loans wouldn't be eligible for these payroll tax credits. So I throw that out there because it is, again, another avenue, but it is one that may conflict if you are already utilizing the payroll protection. I've probably gone longer into an opening than I would otherwise, but I'm trying to anticipate some of the questions that may be out there. But I'll suspend my comments now, turn to Julie. I'm so delighted that you are on. She's back here hunkered down in Washington, D.C., when I think all of us wish we could be back in Alaska, but it's nice to have Julie here, and it's always good to have the congressman with us. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. I just really appreciate the opportunity to give a few remarks on behalf of Dan. First and foremost, to everyone there who's on the line, thank you. Dan and I just wanted to thank you for all that you're doing, particularly in these difficult times. And we know that so many of you are on the front lines of taking care of our most vulnerable Alaskans right now, and that your work is so critically important to our state. And we just wanted to let you know how much you're appreciated. As Lori mentioned, Dan's not able to join today because he was just called into a meeting at the White House at the exact same time as this teleconference, but I know he sends his very, very best. And he was looking forward to this teleconference and to participating with Senator Murkowski and Congressman Young. And by the way, I just wanted to personally say, I've watched your delegation work together so closely and so hard, day and night, really, and you've got a great team in your delegation during this national crisis. They've really got your back. So I just wanted to add that. Dan's staff is on the call, as Lori mentioned, including his state director, Renee Reeve, and David Pigg, his legislative assistant who handles all these issues. And they've been all working around the clock, as I know that Lisa and Dawn's staff have as well. And they are happy to follow up and be available after this meeting if you have any questions as well. As Senator Murkowski noted, there are crucial provisions in this CARES Act that focus on the importance of nonprofits and taking care of our nonprofits. And I know that these provisions were fully supported by our delegation. So thank you again for joining the call today. I suspect this will be the first of many conversations in the time ahead. Please stay safe and healthy as you continue to do your work in our communities. Thank you all so much. Congressman, over to you.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Laura. This has always been an interesting period of time for all of us. I will caution everyone that's listening to this program. This is a brand new bill. I said that $2.5 trillion, the CARES Act, and with the other ones, you're close to about $3 trillion. And no one really knows yet how these monies will be spent. And the nonprofits are one of the most important parts of it because the role they play in our society, and especially in Alaska. As Julie said, the delegation and Lisa, we're going to be with you. I've suggested, and we're going to try to do a pamphlet for each one of these sections and try to simplify it so you know what can and cannot be done. I looked at the questions that sent to us. Some of them are quite complex. The first one, for instance, it says, can you speak specifically to nonprofits that are not charitable C3 or C12? We know that they're not covered in the recovery bill. Can they apply at small businesses, or is there another way for them to seek relief? And that includes C6, et cetera, et cetera. We've asked for clarification for the small business group and administration, and we not received it yet. Maybe the senators have received it. but we are hoping and we're encouraging them to be covered under this section. So I can go on down through it, but just keep the nonprofits. We're well aware of the role you play in the state of Alaska, and there is a specific section. It's just we don't know how to implement it right now, and whether you apply for all the different things there, we'd have to take a look at. But we're working. We'll make sure that the nonprofit organizations in the state of Alaska be able to continue their good work for the people of Alaska. So with that, I'm open for questions.
Wonderful, and thank you all for joining us today. So appreciate your opening comments. Again, this is Lori Wolf, and I'll be moderating the questions. Thanks to all of you for putting those questions up on the bar. We're going to start with the questions that we received yesterday, and then we'll move as time allows to the remaining questions. And again, just know that we will answer as many of these questions as we can. I very much appreciate the opening comments, but and just for time purposes, we'll just jump into the remaining questions. I just do want to echo what our Congressman Young just said, which is we know that the rules, the regulations, the guidelines are all being built literally every hour we know, for example, the PPP regulations came out last night and so everyone is building this relief car as fast as we can while also driving it. So forgiveness to everyone if we don't have all the answers to all your questions, but I appreciate that you're asking them, and we will all do our best to get them answered as we go. So with that, we'll just jump in, and I'll ask the Congressman and Senator Murkowski to just decide who wants to take it. Maybe you both want to answer, and we'll work that as we go together. So the first one is, do you have clarification yet on how the $1.2 billion that comes directly to the state will ensure that nonprofit intent language is honored in its distribution?
I'll just hit that a little bit. We don't have clarification, but we've talked to the governor. This is a united team, and if that money comes to the state, which is supposed to, we will be working very hard, and I know he understands this, that the intent to distribute the money to the nonprofits will take place. When it says it's honored as distribution, I'm confident that will take place.
So to add to that, Lori, so there's $150 billion that will be going to the states. Alaska is going to get at least $1.25 billion. We understand from Treasury that it's their intention that they award each state its share within the next 30 days or 30 days from enactment. And we know, we're seeing it every day, that the costs that states are incurring, the costs that our municipalities, our school district, everyone, as they're trying to deal with the coronavirus. We're going to see our state with lower tax revenues. We're going to see our municipalities with lower bed tax. It is going to be significant here in terms of lost revenues. So I had a discussion day before yesterday with the Secretary of Treasury specific to this issue, because we want to have better understanding as to how these distributions from the state, once the state gets its allocation, how that is distributed out. Because right now the law is pretty broad. It says there is the amount that comes, and then it says that allowable expenses are related to COVID-19, and they must not have been previously budgeted for. So these are eligible expenses that would be made between March 1st of this year and December 30th. So we're working with Treasury to get better definition, but this is something that, in my view, there's still too much gray area here about what will be an allowable expenditure, so we are working this pretty aggressively with Treasury. But it's something that we want to make sure that not only the nonprofit intent language is honored, but that we don't want to be in a situation where those who are spending a lot of money out of necessity right now, operating under the belief that these will be covered expenses, find out after the fact that they are not, and you have the federal government seeking to recoup. That is not the place where we want to be.
And Senator, let me say one thing, Laura, that all of this is related to the COVID-19 cost. And I'm all the nonprofits, keep in mind, keep records, keep an absolutely great book on what's expended if you do get the money, because it has to be related to the COVID-19. Nobody uses it for any other thing.
Thank you both. Very important information, right? That we can only, these are only for COVID-19 expenses, and we're getting lots of questions about that, specific questions about that on the chat bar. We'll work to address those as we can. Again, just reminding you, all of these questions are wonderful. We will be sharing those and finding lots of ways. Some of them are easier to answer, and others are much more complicated. We'll do our best all along. If a nonprofit has more than 500 employees and is not a healthcare organization that has likely a separate provision for relief, can those organizations gain access to relief funds? And if so, through which program? And that the sub question to that is also a conversation around how we calculate those 500 employees. Lots of confusion around seasonal workers, lots of confusion around part-time workers, also quite a bit of confusion around employees that are never going to get hired now, who historically have been hired because of the loss of tourism that Alaska will experience. So rather conversation.
It's my understanding that the smaller operations can apply for a loan intended to help them keep up with payroll, health insurance premiums, and mortgages. If they keep that up for an 8-week period, that loan actually becomes a grant. And there's a loan guarantee program for mid-sized organizations over 500 employees, which would apply to us very well. But what I keep saying, the first thing, the smaller operations, it is you apply for it, you get an 8-week, a payroll, health insurance premiums, and mortgages. And for 8 weeks, then it becomes a grant as time goes by. That's my understanding.
Yeah, yes. And to build out a little bit further, this mid-sized business loan program, this is, as we understand it, largely undefined at this point in time. It's a loan program that's going to be created by the Treasury, and it's specifically designed to fill this gap between the Paycheck Protection Program, which is for the smaller employees, those less than 500, and the big industry stabilization loans to big businesses. So we have recognized that you've got your small businesses, and then we wanted to focus on the industry stabilization, for instance, the aviation industry with the big loan program. So this is, again, kind of for that, this is a gap filler. You would go to your local financial institutions for this loan. The way it's been set up, you would use it to retain 90% of workforce at full wages and benefits through September 30th of 2020, with the intention to restore 90% of workforce in place on February. That's a bad date there. It's not 2020, must be 2021. But I think it is important for folks to realize that this program hasn't been clearly defined at this point in time, but it is designed to be this gap filler between the small business program, the PPP, and the industry stabilization. You raise a really, really important point, though, on how we're counting employees. We know that far too many for many of our businesses, it's seasonal workers. How do they count for purposes of full-time? And then the issue about if they had not been hired, for instance, if you are part of a nonprofit that's involved with any level of tourism activity, and you had planned for the season, hired people to come on effective May 15, and now you don't expect that season to materialize, do they count? They do count. Those who have not been hired are being counted in the categories that will be eligible for unemployment, the expanded unemployment insurance, but how it counts towards the number of employees. I do think it's important to recognize, though, that the small business definition is not just limited to just 500 and below. It is also the applicable size standard for the industry is provided by the SBA through their regulations. So there may be, depending on what your business is, you may be eligible for these small business loans and the opportunities under PPP if you're in that SBA class.
Thank you. And we do know that SBA is ramping up very quickly, and we know our banks and financial institutions across Alaska that are eligible are also ramping up quickly. We have seen an updated list around those eligible financial institutions that nonprofits can access almost daily. I know we're being asked all the time for that updated list. I wondered if you had an update about access to financial institutions or any updates about their readiness to address the crisis. We know, of course, they are also building this car as we're trying to drive it as well.
Well, and as you know, today is the day that things are supposed to be up and running and being able to go to your local lender, and we have been following those that have agreed to participate, but we've also heard concerns this morning from some of the lenders just in terms of the level of assurance that they will have. I think what's fair to say at this point in time is there is a concerted effort on both ends, both at the federal and at Treasury and those local lenders working with SBA to get this program up and going and doing as we all intended it to be. But we also know that we're acting really quick and that the rollout might not go as readily as we might have hoped. But I'm not going to be criticizing anybody for lack of moving fast and trying really hard. We have made considerable efforts to make sure that we were resourcing the SBA appropriately. We've heard concerns from some that, well, there's just not that many people working at the SBA, and so my individual matter is not getting processed. We did appropriate an additional $562 million for SBA administrative expenses so that they can plus up and build out this EIDL loan that I was mentioning just a little bit ago. But right now, everyone's kind of drinking out of a fire hose. And so I think we will post the information as we have it available and share that with you, Lori. I think you can be an extraordinary resource just in terms of getting this out to so many of your nonprofits.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. We are trying to post as much information as we can verify and have available to people. So lots of people with questions about, where do they find that information? And we have stood up a COVID-19 response page. We'll speak more about that at the end. I just want to continue with our questions, just given our time. Can you address, we know that there's specific National Endowment for the Arts and National Endowment for the Humanities relief options inside of the CARES Act. Could you just address that about how it will help Alaska organizations and artists?
Well, it's my understanding there's $75 million in the National Endowment of Arts and National Endowment of Humanities to insist that that's in the bill. It stipulates that 40% awarded to state and regional arts organizations, 60% can be awarded to the arts. The legislation allows funds to be used for general operating expenses, a departure from requirements to support project-based funding, and acknowledgement of the dire situation facing the arts community. In addition, arts organizations do not have to provide matching funds to receive a grant. That doesn't apply. Additionally, there was $78,000 included specifically for the Institute of American Indian and Alaska Native Culture and Arts Development. And that's one of the things that we have to look about. But my understanding that we're really very much in tune with the National Endowment of Arts and the Humanities. So I think that's what's in the bill, and we'll have to follow through on that.
Yeah, let me just add a couple more, because I think we recognize how much more, how much we get from the National Endowment, the Arts, the Endowment for the Humanities. This is my account as chairman of the Interior Appropriations, and so making sure that we're always resourcing this right has been important to me. As the congressman outlined, not only NEA and NEH are receiving these resources, but also the museum and library services. So all three of these agencies are going to be authorized to provide direct grants to support museum operations. As Congressman mentioned, matching requirements waived. He talked about the distribution of the NEA money. So about 40% to state arts agencies like we have with the state council there. And then 60% goes out as direct grants. Same for NEH. We have been contacted by the State Humanity Council, and they're letting us know that it's the councils that are doing so much of the humanities work out there. So they are hoping to be able to use their portion for some operating costs. So we're working to address that, but we do understand that NEH is planning on announcing funding opportunities for those organizations that are asking for support for positions and projects at cultural nonprofits that have been impacted. So it's my understanding that more information on this is going to be provided by the end of the month, April 30th, so look for it then. But again, we know, man, when you think about the impact around the state, we've been so focused on some of the more high-profile industries, but the ripple effect that our nonprofits have in each and every one of the communities is just so big, so important, and so having opportunities for these kinds of grants, I think, is going to be critical for you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Of course, we're hearing so much urgency from our nonprofits who need to take action right now. But we also know this economic crisis is much larger and will last a long time here in Alaska due to all the other challenges that we're facing. We've been hearing today the loss of another airlines, which isolates our communities even more. And the loss of our ferry system, which was also isolating and keeping food out of communities already. There's so much impact to Alaska given our current situation before COVID-19. Wondering if you are seeing ways already where a fourth relief package might work to address some of these longer term issues rather than just the immediate challenges.
Well, I can only say one thing. I think the senators did a great job, and the whole delegation did writing this bill. And we'll be looking at everything else to think anything happened. But the CARES Act, had some fairly quick effects. Direct payments to adults of $1,200. I can go down the line what it did. There's a lot of good work in this bill right now for immediate relief. And if we get another bill, just be very careful. Everybody's talking about a fourth bill. I'm not sure that's going to be a reality. I talked to the leadership today on the House side, on the Democrat side, and they're writing the bill, but there's not as much enthusiasm there was the other day. So I think if you look at the CARES Act and interpret it, as we help you interpret it, there's a lot of good, quick action. Now, having said that, now, Laura, I have to take off. I got another phone call, and I do apologize. I thank all of you for listening. We'll get through this. Of the mature years, I've been through quite a few of these crises in my 2 years, and Americans, Alaskans especially, will get through this problem, and we'll get it solved. Let's work together, and let's see if we can't, do the job as we've been doing it to make sure everybody benefits from it. So with that, thank you, Lori. Appreciate it. I do have to go.
Thank you, Congressman. Senator Murkowski will stay with us. I hope we have just about 10 more minutes together. Appreciate you sticking with us. Appreciate that. So many amazing questions. Go ahead.
Can I go ahead, Lori, because I think your question is an important one. We are so focused on the immediacy of the moment and of necessity. But I do think that it is important to recognize that, as the Congressman says, we will get through this. And so I always find that it's easier to get through tough days if I have something to look forward to. And I think that we do need to be looking forward to how we're going to move on the other side of this economic impact, this health impact that we're seeing from this pandemic, and move forward. Our reality is that this economic contraction that we're experiencing is the fastest on record that we've had by a large margin here. We've probably lost as many jobs over the past couple of weeks as we did in the whole of the Great Recession. It is what we're facing is massive economically, and that's why this policy response with the CARES Act, with the Families First, with the initial supplemental bill, the response has to be as massive as the impact that we're feeling, and yet we recognize that what we have moved forward for the most part is more akin to disaster relief rather than what would be described as a fiscal stimulus. We recognize that there are stimulus elements in it, but this is really, it's been stabilization. And so how do we talk about recovery? How do we view recovery? And I do think it is important, as the Congressman has noted, that we kind of take a deep breath here as we're implementing all that we've put in place in just a month to move through legislation and funding of this size and scope. It's breathtaking. So we need to see how we have worked to stabilize it. We know that there will be things that we have not gotten right. There will be technical corrections. There are going to be some things that we just missed the boat entirely on. We either undershot or overshot. And so I do think it is important that we kind of look at where we are right now and where we need to, where we want to go from the perspective of how can we build off of what we have? How can we ensure that not only we get back on our feet, but that we can start moving forward? And so there have been some who have said, well, wait a minute, this is a lot of money out the door. You really, have you thought about how much you're spending? And yes, we have thought about it, but in fairness, if we fail to provide enough assistance, I think what you will see is you're going to have folks that will end up reducing their spending, and that's going to lead to more of a rise in unemployment. We're going to be looking at the potential for an actual recession. So aid to those in the shutdown sector actually includes an element of some conventional fiscal stimulus. It's not its central goal, but we know we're going to have to be doing more. And so there are discussions, as the congressman has said, going on right now. We're talking with folks all over the state saying, all right, give us your ideas, because we've been kicked pretty hard as an economy, and we're not through it yet. So as we look to what we might do next, give us your thoughts, and I would ask you also to give us your thoughts with that as well. It's going to be important, and whether it's infrastructure that we're talking about, everything from more rural broadband to water and wastewater to what we may need to do with mental health and behavioral health programs in the aftermath of this economic disaster. We're gonna need to be doing more, and we will work to do so with your thoughts in mind.
Thank you so much. We have time for just a couple of more questions. You noted that it's always good to look for some bright spots in all of this, and so I'll note that one of the bright spots was the universal tax deduction that was offered in the CARES Act. I wondered if you could speak to that. That's a moment in our history, and I wondered if you could speak to that and the thought about or an idea or anything that you're hearing about the ability to expand that beyond the 2020 taxes.
You know, I haven't. I think it's too early to hear about expansion of many of these provisions that we've included for the first time. I think, as you say, this is significant and I think important. I would say overdue, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself in suggesting that we're going to see that permanent expansion, if you will. So I've been caught trying to read a crystal ball a few times lately, and I've realized it's a pretty challenging time to do that right now. But this is a big deal, and we'd like to think that it can be continued.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Just a few more questions. Do you know if there are efforts that will be made? One of the areas that we've identified, lots of our nonprofits are using unemployment trusts. Do you know what effort will be made to increase the reimbursement from 50% to 100% for employees participating in the self-funded unemployment programs? And maybe that's just been a gap or an identified gap.
Yeah. I don't know the answer to that. This was raised, I don't even remember if it was this week or last week, with that as a question. Lori, let us find out the answer to that one. I'm not sure.
Yeah, absolutely. We've also just been identifying it as maybe an opportunity that wasn't anticipated, right. But it does impact many of our nonprofits. So let's see. Just got.
Can I go back to an issue that was raised? So this was over a week ago when we had an initial call with many of you. Not necessarily within the nonprofit community, it was a broader call, but it was the issue of whether or not nonprofits were were required to personally guarantee or put up collateral for SBA loans, and it was you that raised that to our attention, and then we were asked about it several times afterwards. But I think that issue has been made more clear. There was confusion because the traditional economic injury disaster loans, the EIDL loans, do require a personal guarantee from applicants, including certain nonprofits. But then CARES waives the personal guarantee for disaster loans up to $200,000, so it took care of that part of it. And then also in the Paycheck Protection Program, it waives the personal guarantee and the collateral requirement. So we reconciled that confusion. I do hear that there is still some concern with regards to the Social Security numbers being used as opposed to driver's license on some of the credit application. So these are some technical issues that have been raised. We want to make sure that our executive directors in these nonprofits are not put in a situation where they end up as a personal guarantee because of Social Security numbers that have been used or personal background checks as part of the loan process. So just wanting to raise that issue with you as well.
Thank you so much, Senator. We definitely, this is a big concern for us, and one of the ways where nonprofits are so different than our small businesses and our other corporations in terms of this notion of ownership. And we have continued to see people having to answer that question of quote ownership, which is just a very different definition for our nonprofits than for others. So appreciate that this is one of those moments where the SBA is having to shift to reconcile their relationship with us in the CARES Act. So appreciate you working closely with us to help figure that out. I think we're still hitting some of those roadblocks, but we can manage them together. And if folks on this call are hitting those roadblocks, please let us know. We also have the attention of some of our commissioners in the state who are also aware and are thinking about how to fix this problem.
Good.
Thank you so much for that. We have time just for a few questions from the chat bar. There's so many good ones. It's just, again, I promise you all that we are gonna get all of your questions answered, but not in the next 2.5 minutes. One that popped out for me that I think is very universal for so many on this call is something that I was not aware of, which is that the SBA has criteria that if organizations receive more than 1/3 of their revenue from charitable gaming, that it makes them ineligible. That was not something that I have been aware of, but that would certainly greatly impact quite a number of our nonprofits across the state, urban, rural, and all sorts of different sectors, subsectors. I wondered if you had heard that, or do you know, do you have any information?
No. But as soon as you said that, my immediate reaction was, that is not good. That is not an interpretation that is good for us in Alaska, because so many receive some aspect of charitable gaming. What we'd want to do is we want to look to how they define that. But no, I will have my folks get on this right now. This is the first I've heard of that. So thank you for raising that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, we're all learning these things together, which a little bit scary, but now that we know it, let's chase it down.
Absolutely. And you know, and again, lots of the questions on this call are about how to calculate payroll, and again, 4-Acre will be ready to help you with that, as will the SBDC will be ready to help you with that. So I won't address those calculation questions here because we have another mechanism to do that. We did just get, again, clarity on the rules just last night about that. So there will be some good answers. I'll highlight, I think we have time for at least one more question. Diane Kaplan is asking us, the shelters in Anchorage are already under stress. Annually, prospective fishery workers arrive in Anchorage waiting for work and plane tickets and stay in the shelters. Can you help us arrange housing for these arrivals who now have quarantine for 14 days? We also know that this is true for our slope workers. So that shelters are not further stressed by the summer fisheries going forward. And I'll just note that we do know, under high stress all across our state are all of our shelter programs, all of our domestic violence shelters, programs who are helping children, people who are helping the homeless, and food security, just a high need. So lots to address in that question, final question, but and wondered if you could just address what you're hearing about.
Yeah. We've been in contact with several of the different companies that are involved with our seafood processing industry, and they have a process and a system where for most of them it's a pretty structured thing in terms of how they move workers in and move them if they're coming up from outside. Oftentimes it's charter flights. Oftentimes it's just moving through Anchorage, and then the processors themselves are housing and facilitating them, similar to what you see with slope workers, but it's the employer that more often than not is the one that is arranging for that level of movement, whether it's the transportation or, in this case, having to deal with quarantine. The ones that won't fit in that are those that we see every summer, young men and women that have an opportunity to go out on a fishing boat in Bristol Bay or some other part of the state, and they're just making their way north. So this is an issue where ordinarily they would make their way to Alaska and then hop on the plane and go out to King Salmon, go out to Naknek. But with the quarantine requirements that are still in place, that makes it challenging. My hope is that we're not going to be in that quarantine status for forever, that by the time fishing season really comes on, we're going to be beyond that. But I don't think that that's a very constructive plan. We need to have a plan in place, and that goes to Diane's point. So this is something that we're all trying to think through. I want to recognize the work of the mayor, along with the Homeless Coalition there, for the very proactive effort that they have made to open up Ben Boki and the Sullivan to accommodate the many homeless in spaces that are safer and allow for a level of social distancing. I know that this is not without cost. These, again, when you think about the expenses that a municipality is taking on in response to COVID-19, these are things that we would look to and say, this is exactly the type of eligible expense that we should be able to claim with that state stabilization money. I do think that every effort that we can make now for planning purposes to line up facilities for those who would be these transit workers, I guess is what I would call them for now, because they're not staying in the Anchorage area, but they're trying to move up at times of quarantine. This is where the Housing Coalition, the work that's being done there, continues to be even more important as we try to accommodate those that we already have, much less trying to anticipate what may be coming in the next couple months. Know that we flagged this as an issue. We'll be working with not only the Housing Coalition, but other business partners as well. I have been really proud as an Alaskan, as I have seen how individuals, the business communities, people all over the state have really come together, a sense of not only generosity, but trying to figure out how we work through all of this together. I know that many are competitors in the business world, but there's a coming together in this crisis that makes me proud as an Alaskan. So we'll keep working. We'll keep working.
Senator Murkowski, thank you so much. I know I speak for everyone on this call when I say that all of our nonprofits are standing beside you and our small businesses and all of our industry across Alaska to help solve these problems. We are working every day and inside of our communities all across Alaska. And we are so grateful to you as we are figuring this out together. We're right at our time, and I want to say thank you so much for sticking with us and answering these important questions, and know that your staff, all the congressional staff are on the call and are watching these important questions come up. Know as well that we are at 4Acre are ready to stand alongside with you. We have we are updating our website every day with important information. I share this as an example of a specific information for nonprofits around how we're talking about what's available to every nonprofit out there. And as more and more information comes, we are happy to share it. So Senator, please, if you have information you would like to get out to the nonprofits, please let us know. We are happy to be a conduit for you and the whole delegation. And we are, that includes looking at all of these questions. We are also working to address new ways to help, not just today, but in the long haul. We know all of our organizations, again, this is both an immediate crisis and a long-term process of recovery. So just know that we stand with you. Please don't hesitate to call us. And again, Senator, thank you so much for being with us today. We wish you and your family good health, and we thank you so much.
Lori, thank you for the opportunity and for all that so many of you are doing. I just had one more thought as you were wrapping up. I know that so many of those who work for our nonprofits are young people. And so many of our young people are heavily burdened with student loan debt. I didn't mention that as one of the I view it as really direct assistance to so many of these young people to know that their federal student loans will be deferred for a 6-month period, interest deferred. And this is, when you've got a $500 monthly student loan payment and you're struggling because everything seems to have stopped, to know that this is going to be one less financial burden to you is important. So I wanted to make sure that before we wrapped, I mentioned that, because I know that a lot of folks that are working for you are in this situation. But again, let me extend my thanks to you, and we will use you as that resource, as I know many others do. We'll feed you information as you feed it to us. So thank you, and know that we will be responsive the entire delegation. Again, as Julie had mentioned, our staffs are ready and trying to work through the many questions that Alaskans have. So we're here for you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And again, Julie Fate Sullivan, I know you've stayed on the line with us, and thank you so much. And thank you to all of your staff who have been with us and helping us think through these great questions and conversations. We appreciate all of you. Again, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining the call. And we look forward to helping you navigate your way forward. Happy Friday, everybody.